Chapter 6, Part 1 of the Eventful History of the Mutiny and Piratical Seizure of HMS Bounty, its Cause and Consequences. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Brett Downey. The Eventful History of the Mutiny and Piratical Seizure of HMS Bounty by Sir John Barrow. Chapter 6, Part 1. The Court-Martial. If any person in, or belonging to the fleet shall make, or endeavour to make, any mutinous assembly, upon any pretence whatsoever, every person offending herein, and being convicted thereof, by the sentence of the court-martial shall suffer death. Naval Articles of War, Article 19. The court assembled to try the prisoners on board His Majesty's ship Duke, on the 12th September, 1792, and continued by adjournment from day to day, Sunday excepted, until the 18th of the same month. Footnote 24. Present: Vice Admiral Lord Hood, President. Captain Sir Andrew Snape Hammond, Baronet. Captain John Colpoys. Captain Sir George Montague. Captain Sir Roger Curtis. Captain John Bazley. Captain Sir Andrew Snape Douglas. Captain John Thomas Duckworth. Captain John Nicholson Inglefield. Captain John Knight. Captain Albemarle Bertie. Captain Richard Goodwin Keats. The charge is set forth that Fletcher Christian, who was mate of the Bounty, assisted by others of the inferior officers and men, armed with muskets and bayonets, had violently and forcibly taken that ship from her commander, Lieutenant Bligh, and that he, together with the master, boatswain, gunner, and carpenter, and other persons, being 19 in number, were forced into the launch and cast adrift. That Captain Edwards, in the Pandora, was directed to proceed to Otaheite, and other islands in the South Seas, and to use his best endeavours to recover the said vessel, and to bring in confinement to England the said Fletcher Christian and his associates, or as many of them as he might be able to apprehend, in order that they might be brought to condign punishment, etc. That Peter Heywood, James Morrison, Charles Norman, Joseph Coleman, Thomas Ellison, Thomas M'Intosh, Thomas Burkitt, John Millward, William Muspratt, and Michael Byrne, had been brought to England, etc., and were now put on their trial. Mr. Fryer, the master of the Bounty, being first sworn, deposed: That he had the first watch; that between 10 and 11 o'clock Mr. Bligh came on deck, according to custom, and after a short conversation, and having given his orders for the night, left the deck; that at 12 he was relieved by the gunner, and retired, leaving all quiet; that at dawn of day he was greatly alarmed by an unusual noise; and that, on attempting to jump up, John Sumner and Matthew Quintal laid their hands upon his breast and desired him to lie still, saying he was their prisoner; that on expostulating with them he was told, 'Hold your tongue, or you are a dead man; but if you remain quiet there is none aboard will hurt a hair of your head.' He further deposes, that on raising himself on the locker, he saw on the ladder, going upon deck, Mr. Bligh in his shirt, with his hands tied behind him, and Christian holding him by the cord; that the master at arms, Churchill, then came to his cabin, and took a brace of pistols and a hanger, saying, 'I will take care of these, Mr. Fryer;' that he asked, on seeing Mr. Bligh bound, what they were going to do with the captain; that Sumner replied, 'Damn his eyes, put him into the boat, and let him see if he can live upon 3/4 of a pound of yams a day;' that he remonstrated with such conduct, but in vain. They said he must go in the small cutter. 'The small cutter!' Mr. Fryer exclaimed; 'why her bottom is almost out, and very much eaten by the worms;' to which Sumner and Quintal both said, 'Damn his eyes, the boat is too good for him;' that after much entreaty he prevailed upon them to ask Christian if he might be allowed to go on deck, which, after some hesitation, was granted. 'When I came on deck,' says Mr. Fryer, 'Mr. Bligh was standing by the mizzen mast, with his hands tied behind him, and Christian holding the cord with one hand, and a bayonet in the other. I said, Christian, consider what you are about.' 'Hold your tongue, sir,' he said. 'I have been in hell for weeks past. Captain Bligh has brought all this on himself." I told him that Mr. Bligh and he not agreeing was no reason for taking the ship. "Hold your tongue, sir," he said. I said, "Mr. Christian, you and I have been on friendly terms during the voyage, therefore give me leave to speak. Let Mr. Bligh go down to his cabin, and I make no doubt we shall all be friends again." He then repeated, "Hold your tongue, sir, it is too late," and threatening me if I said anything more. Mr. Fryer then asked him to give a better boat than the cutter. He said, "No, that boat is good enough." Bligh now said to the master that the man behind the hen coops, Isaac Martin, was his friend, and desired him, the master, to knock Christian down, which Christian must have heard, but took no notice. That Fryer then attempted to get past Christian to speak to Martin, but he put his bayonet to his breast, saying, "Sir, if you advance an inch farther I will run you through," and ordered 2 armed men to take him down to his cabin. Shortly afterwards he was desired to go on deck, when Christian ordered him into the boat. He said, "I will stay with you if you will give me leave." "No, sir," he replied, "go directly into the boat." Bligh then on the gangway said, "Mr. Fryer, stay in the ship." "No, by God, sir," Christian said, "go into the boat, or I will run you through." Mr. Fryer states that during this time very bad language was used by the people towards Mr. Bligh, that with great difficulty they prevailed on Christian to suffer a few articles to be put into the boat; that after the persons were ordered into the boat, to the number of 19, such opprobrious language continued to be used, several of the men calling out, "Shoot the blank!" that Cole, the boatswain, advised they should cast off and take their chance, as the mutineers would certainly do them a mischief if they stayed much longer. Mr. Fryer then states the names of those who were under arms, and that Joseph Coleman, Thomas M'Intosh, Charles Norman, and Michael Byrne, prisoners, wished to come into the boat, declaring they had nothing to do in the business; that he did not perceive Mr. Peter Heywood on deck at the seizure of the ship. On being asked what he supposed Christian meant when he said he had been in hell for a fortnight, he said, from the frequent quarrels that they had, and the abuse he had received from Mr. Bligh, and that the day before the mutiny Mr. Bligh had challenged all the young gentlemen and people with stealing his cocoanuts. Mr. Cole, the boatswain, deposes that he had the middle watch, was awakened out of his sleep in the morning, and heard a man calling out to the carpenter, that they had mutinied and taken the ship, that Christian had the command, and that the captain was a prisoner on the quarter deck; that he went up the hatchway, having seen Mr. Heywood and Mr. Young in the opposite berth; that coming on deck he saw the captain with his hands tied behind him, and 4 sentinels standing over him, 2 of which were Ellison and Burkitt, the prisoners; that he asked Mr. Christian what he meant to do, and was answered by his ordering him to hoist the boat out, and shook the bayonet, threatening him and damning him if he did not take care; that when he found the captain was to be sent out of the ship he again went aft with the carpenter to ask for the long boat; that they asked 3 or 4 times before he granted it; that he saw Mr. Peter Heywood, one of the prisoners, lending a hand to get the forced stayfall along, and when the boat was hooked on, spoke something to him, but what it was does not know, as Christian was threatening him at the time; that Heywood then went below, and does not remember seeing him afterwards; that after the few things were got into the boat, and most of the people in her, they were trying for the carpenter's tool chest, when Quintal said, "Damn them, if we let them have these things they will build a vessel in a month." But when all were in the boat she was veered astern, when Coleman, Norman, and M'Intosh, prisoners, were crying at the gangway, wishing to go in the boat; and Byrne in the cutter alongside was also crying, that he advised Mr. Bligh to cast off, as he feared they would fire into the boat. The court asked if he had any reason to believe that any other of the prisoners than those named were detained contrary to their inclinations. Answer: I believe Mr. Heywood was. I thought all along he was intending to come away. He had no arms, and he assisted to get the boat out, and then went below. I heard Churchill call out, "Keep them below!" The Court: Do you think he meant Heywood? I have no reason to think any other. Mr. Peckover, the gunner's evidence is similar to that of Mr. Cole's, and need not be detailed. Mr. Purcell, the carpenter, corroborated, generally, the testimony of the 3 who had been examined. The Court asked, Did you see Mr. Heywood standing upon the booms? Yes, he was leaning the flat part of his hand on a cutlass, when I exclaimed, "In the name of God, Peter, what do you do with that?" when he instantly dropped it, and assisted in hoisting the launch out, and handing the things into the boat, and then went down below, when I heard Churchill call to Thompson to keep them below, but could not tell whom he meant. I did not see Mr. Heywood after that. The Court. In what light did you look upon Mr. Heywood at the time you say he dropped the cutlass on your speaking to him? Witness. I looked upon him as a person confused, and that he did not know he had a weapon in his hand, or his hand being on it, for it was not in his hand. I considered him to be confused by his instantly dropping it, and assisting in hoisting the boat out, which convinced me in my own mind that he had no hand in the conspiracy; that after this he went below, as I think, on his own account, in order to collect some of his things to put into the boat. The Court. Do you, upon the solemn oath you have taken, believe that Mr. Heywood, by being armed with the cutlass at the time you have mentioned, by anything that you could collect from his gestures or speeches, had any intention of opposing, or joining others that might oppose, to stop the progress of the mutiny? Witness. No. The Court. In the time that Mr. Heywood was assisting you to get the things into the boat, did he, in any degree whatsoever, manifest a disposition to assist in the mutiny? Witness. No. The Court. Was he, during that time, deliberate or frightened, and in what manner did he behave himself? Witness. I had not an opportunity of observing his every action, being myself at that time engaged in getting several things into the boat, so that I cannot tell. The Court. Putting every circumstance together, declare to this Court, upon the oath you have taken, how you considered his behaviour, whether as a person joined in the mutiny, or as a person wishing well to Captain Bligh. Witness. I by no means considered him as a person concerned in the mutiny or conspiracy. Lieutenant Thomas Hayward, late 3rd Lieutenant of the Pandora, and formerly midshipman of the Bounty, deposes, that he had the morning watch, that at 4 o'clock Fletcher Christian relieved the watch as usual, that at 5 he ordered him, as master's mate of his watch, to look out, while he went down to lash his hammock up; that while looking at a shark astern of the ship, to his unutterable surprise, he saw Fletcher Christian, Charles Churchill, Thomas Burkitt, the prisoner, John Sumner, Matthew Quintal, William McCoy, Isaac Martin, Henry Hillbrant, and Alexander Smith, coming aft, armed with muskets and bayonets; that on going forward he asked Christian the cause of such an act, who told him to hold his tongue instantly, and leaving Isaac Martin as a sentinel on deck, he proceeded with the rest of his party below to Lieutenant Bligh's cabin; that the people on deck were Mr. John Hallett, myself, Robert Lamb, Butcher, Thomas Ellison, prisoner, at the helm, and John Mills at the conn; that he asked Mills if he knew anything of the matter, who pleaded total ignorance, and Thomas Ellison quitted the helm and armed himself with a bayonet; that the decks now became thronged with armed men; that Peter Heywood, James Morrison, 2 of the prisoners, and George Stewart were unarmed on the booms; that Fletcher Christian and his gang had not been down long before he heard the cry of murder from Lieutenant Bligh, and Churchill calling out for a rope, on which Mills, contrary to all orders and entreaties, cut the deep sea line and carried a piece of it to their assistance; that soon after Lieutenant Bligh was brought upon the quarter deck with his hands bound behind him, and was surrounded by most of those who came last on deck. This witness then states that on the arrival of the Pandora at Matavai Bay, Joseph Coleman was the first that came on board; that he was upset in a canoe and assisted by the natives; that as soon as the ship was at anchor, George Stewart and Peter Heywood came on board; that they made themselves known to Captain Edwards, and expressed their happiness that he was arrived; that he asked them how they came to go away with his Majesty's ship the Bounty, when George Stewart said, when called upon hereafter, he would answer all particulars; that he was prevented by Captain Edwards from answering further questions, and they were sent out of the cabin to be confined. He then describes the manner in which the rest of the mutineers were taken on the island, having stated that when he went below to get some things he saw Peter Heywood in his berth, and told him to go into the boat. He was asked by the court if Heywood was prevented by any force from going upon deck. He answered, No. The court: Did you, from his behaviour, consider him as a person attached to his duty or to the party of mutineers? Witness: I should rather suppose, after my having told him to go into the boat, and he not joining us, to be on the side of the mutineers, but that must be understood only as an opinion, as he was not in the least employed during the active part of it. The court: Did you observe any marks of joy or sorrow on his countenance or behaviour? Witness: Sorrow. Lieutenant Hallett, late midshipman of the Bounty, states that he had the morning watch, that he heard Lieutenant Bligh call out murder, and presently after saw him brought upon the deck naked, excepting his shirt, with his hands tied behind him, and Christian holding the end of the cord which tied them in one hand, and either a bayonet or a cutlass in the other; that the cutter was hoisted out, and Mr. Samuel, Mr. Hayward, and myself ordered to go into her, but the boatswain and carpenter going aft, and telling Christian they wished to go with the captain rather than stay in the ship, and asking to have the launch, it was granted. On being asked if he saw Peter Heywood on that day, he replied, once, on the platform, standing still and looking attentively towards Captain Bligh. Never saw him under arms, nor spoke to him. Does not know if he offered to go into the boat, nor did he hear any one propose to him to go into the boat. That when standing on the platform, Captain Bligh said something to him, but what he did not hear, upon which Heywood laughed, turned round, and walked away. Captain Edwards, being then called and sworn, was desired by the court to state the conversation that passed between him and Coleman, Peter Heywood, and George Stewart when they came on board the Pandora. Edwards: Joseph Coleman attempted to come on board before the ship came to an anchor at Otaheite. He was soon afterwards taken up by canoes, and came on board before the ship came to an anchor. I began to make inquiries of him after the Bounty and her people. The next who came on board were Stewart and Peter Heywood. They came after the ship was at anchor, but before any boat was on shore. I did not see them come alongside. I desired Lieutenant Larkin to bring them down to the cabin. I asked them what news. Peter Heywood, I think, said he supposed I had heard of the affair of the Bounty. I don't recollect all the conversation that passed between us. He sometimes interrupted me by asking for Mr. Hayward, the lieutenant of the Pandora, whether he was on board or not. He had heard that he was. At last I acknowledged that he was, and I desired him to come out of my stateroom, where I had desired him to go into, as he happened to be with me at the time. Lieutenant Hayward treated him with a sort of contemptuous look, and began to enter into conversation with him respecting the Bounty. But I called the sentinel in, to take them into custody, and ordered Lieutenant Hayward to desist, and I ordered them to be put into irons. Some words passed, and Peter Heywood said he should be able to vindicate his conduct. Lieutenant Corner, of the Pandora, merely states his being sent to bring the rest of the mutineers on board, who were at some distance from Matavai Bay. The prisoners being called on for their defence, the witnesses were again separately called, and examined on the part of the prisoners. Mr. Fryer, the master, called in and examined by Mr. Heywood. If you had been permitted, would you have stayed in the ship in preference to going into the boat? Witness: Yes. Prisoner: Had you stayed in the ship in expectation of retaking her, was my conduct such, from the first moment you knew me to this, as would have induced you to entrust me with your design, and do you believe I would have favoured it, and given you all the assistance in my power? Witness: I believe he would. I should not have hesitated a moment in asking of him, when I had an opportunity of opening my mind to him. Same question being put to Mr. Cole, the boatswain, Mr. Peckover, the gunner, and Mr. Purcell, the carpenter, they all answered in the affirmative. Mr. Heywood asked, What was my general conduct, temper, and disposition on board the ship? Witness: Beloved by everybody, to the best of my recollection. To the same question Mr. Cole answers, Always a very good character. Mr. Peckover: The most amiable and deserving of everyone's esteem. Mr. Purcell: In every respect becoming the character of a gentleman, and such as merited the esteem of everybody. Mr. Cole, being examined, gave his testimony, that he never saw Mr. Heywood armed, that he did not consider him of the mutineers' party, that he saw nothing of levity or apparent merriment in his conduct, that when he was below with Stewart, he heard Churchill call out, keep them below," and that he believes Heywood was one of the persons meant. Has no doubt of it at all. That Bligh could not have spoken to him, when on the booms, loud enough to be heard. That Heywood was alarmed, and Hallet alarmed. That he by no means considers Heywood or Morrison as mutineers. Mr. Purcell, being examined, states that respecting the cutlass on which he saw Mr. Heywood's hand resting, he does not consider him as being an armed man; that he never thought of him as of the mutineers' party; that he never heard Captain Bligh speak to him; that he thinks from his situation he could not have heard him; that he was by no means guilty of levity or apparent merriment; that he heard the master at arms call out to keep them below; that Mr. Hallet appeared to him to be very much confused; and that Mr. Heywood likewise appeared to be very much confused. The court asked, "As you say you did not look upon the prisoner as a person armed, to what did you allude when you exclaimed, 'Good God, Peter, what do you do with that?'" Witness: "I look upon it as an accidental thing." Captain Edwards being asked by Heywood, "Did I surrender myself to you upon the arrival of the Pandora at Otaheite?" Witness: "Not to me, to the lieutenant. I apprehend he put himself in my power. I always understood he came voluntarily. Our boats were not in the water." Prisoner: "Did I give you such information respecting myself and the Bounty as afterwards proved true?" Witness: "He gave me some information respecting the people on the island, that corroborated with Coleman's. I do not recollect the particular conversation, but in general it agreed with the account given by Coleman." Prisoner: "When I told you that I went away the first time from Otaheite with the pirates, did I not at the same time inform you that it was not possible for me to separate myself from Christian, who would not permit any man of the party to leave him at that time, lest, by giving intelligence, they might have been discovered whenever a ship should arrive?" Witness: "Yes, but I do not recollect the latter part of it, respecting giving intelligence." Mr. Fryer again called in and examined by Mr. Morrison. Mr. Fryer states he saw him assist in hoisting out the boats; that he said to him, Fryer, "Go down below." The court asked whether it might not have been from a laudable motive, as supposing your assistance at that time might have prevented a more advantageous effort. Witness: "Probably it might. Had I stayed in the ship, he would have been one of the first that I should have opened my mind to, from his good behaviour in the former part of the voyage. States his belief that he addressed him as advice, and that, in hoisting out the boat, he was assisting Captain Bligh. Mr. Cole, the boatswain, states that he ordered Morrison to go and help them with the cutter; that he told them the boat was overloaded; that Captain Bligh had begged that no more people should go in her, and said he would take his chance in the ship; that he shook Morrison by the hand, and said he would do him justice in England; that he had no reason to suppose him concerned in the mutiny. Lieutenant Thomas Hayward states that Morrison appeared joyful, and supposed him to be one of the mutineers. On being asked by Morrison if he could declare before God and the court that what he stated was not the result of private pique? Witness: "Not the result of any private pique, but an opinion formed after quitting the ship. From his not coming with us, there being more boats than one, cannot say they might have had the cutter." This witness was pleased to remember nothing that was in favour of the prisoner. Lieutenant Hallet states he saw Morrison under arms. Being asked in what part of the ship, he says, "I did not see him under arms till the boat was veered astern, and he was then looking over the taffrail, and called out, in a jeering manner, 'If my friends inquire after me, tell them I am somewhere in the South Seas.'" Captain Edwards bore testimony that Morrison voluntarily surrendered himself. Mr. Fryer did not see Morrison armed. He was in his watch, and he considered him a steady, sober, attentive, good man, and acknowledged that if he had remained in the ship, with the view of retaking her, Morrison would have been one of the first he should have called to his assistance. Mr. Cole gave testimony to his being a man of good character, attentive to his duty, and he never knew any harm of him. Mr. Purcell bore witness to his good character, being always diligent and attentive. Did not see him under arms on the taffrail, never heard him use any jeering speeches. Respecting the prisoner Muspratt, Mr. Cole's evidence proves that he had a musket in his hands, but not till the latter part of the business. It is also proved that he assisted in getting things into the launch. Mr. Peckover saw him standing on the forecastle doing nothing. He was not armed. Lieutenant Hayward saw Muspratt among the armed men. Was asked when Captain Bligh used the words, "Don't let the boat be overloaded, my lads, I'll do you justice." Do you understand the latter words, "My lads, I'll do you justice," to apply to clothes or to men, whom he apprehended might go into the boat? Witness: If Captain Bligh made use of the words "my lads," it was to the people already in the boat, and not to those in the ship. The Court: To whom do you imagine Captain Bligh alluded? Was it, in your opinion, to the men in the boat with him, or to any persons then remaining in the ship? Witness: To persons remaining in the ship. Chapter 6 Recording by Brett Downey.